I do see our guest.
I was
There
raising
she
my
is.
hand. Hello.
This is the Reverend Dr. Michelle Morris. She is with First United Methodist Church here in Bentonville, where my family attends. I know Michelle. We've hung out together a few times, and she's got a really interesting story. And I knew I wanted to bring her on this show to talk about the issue of housing and affordable housing and a way of thinking about affordable housing that allows houses of worship. I don't want to just say churches, but we've got an unusual situation down here in Bentonville. I don't know if folks realize, but Bentonville is Walmart HQ. And it has absolutely developed. My family, we've had some serial migration down here. And when my family got down here, it was really a very tiny little town, not much going on, and it has exploded with cultural activities and building and business, and that's been very exciting. But as it often happens, it raises the cost of housing. So, Michelle, would you mind telling us your story and how you've
Sure.
experienced this?
Yes. So I'm a United Methodist pastor, and United Methodist pastors are appointed by the bishop. And
Mhm,
so we move when we're told to move, and we move where we're told to move. And
mhm.
churches have two possibilities for providing housing for their pastors. One is to provide a parsonage, and that used to be the standard. But sometime in the 1990s, 2000s, there was a move away from parsonages, in part because it was expensive for churches to maintain. We Parsonages have to meet certain accessibility standards and things like that to make sure that anyone can be appointed and serve there. And then we also found that pastors who were lifelong career pastors were retiring with 0 credit because they had always lived in a house that was provided for them. So, in the 90s, 2000s, when there was a robust real estate market, and especially in towns like Bentonville, where you could turn over a house pretty quickly, churches went away from providing parsonages and started providing a housing allowance.
Okay.
And that was to allow the pastor to, if they wanted to get a house, they could get a house and then start building their credit and building some equity and things like that. If they wanted to, live in an apartment, they could do that, whatever fit for them. And that was great
Mhm.
until about, well, kind of coming out of the pandemic when
Okay.
things went really crazy. The other piece was, of course, it's not just Bentonville that's experiencing this. This is a nationwide problem
Mhm.
with housing affordability. And I am paid very well by this church, but I am a single person. I do not have a secondary income. And Bentonville is now at the point where if you do not make $300,000 a year in a household income, you really can't afford a house in this town.
Mm.
And again, the church pays me very well, but not quite to that level.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that would be excessive.
You're not Joe Osteen, in other words.
Everyone was, I mean,
Yeah.
really want them to pour resources into the community
Yeah.
for instance, with a food pantry that has more than doubled
Yeah.
in need in the
It's an
past 2
amazing
years.
food pantry.
However, I do have to live somewhere.
Oh,
I was renting a house when I first got to town, and they realized that they could sell it. It was a 1,100 square foot house built in the 1960s, and they sold it for almost $700,000.
Yeah.
And so then I had 60 days to vacate. I was applying all over town, and there are very few low income or subsidized housing opportunities in this part of the world, but I wouldn't have applied for that. My income wouldn't have done it. But even those kind of like in between, the few in betweens that were there, I didn't
yeah.
apply there either because there are people that are making $70,000 a year. They need to have those options. So I was applying within my income range, and I had a six-figure salary and a credit score in the 800s. And I'm a pastor, and I was no one's first choice for housing. I finally had to call and beg a builder and play the pastor card, to be quite honest. Just say, "I'm not gonna have wild parties. Come on now."
No keggers.
Right.
No keggers.
And I got into a townhouse that was unfinished. They had a completely unfinished room. I had a finished bedroom and everything, but one of the rooms was unfinished. I mean, by no flooring on the floors, no drywall, exposed installation. The windows weren't sealed, and they could get an occupancy letter because housing is so tight in this part of the world. And rent kept going up, and then they started requiring a full inspection every 3 months, including going through cabinets and closets and all of that. And I have some trauma related to housing.
Mhm.
I certainly felt surveilled all the time.
Sure, absolutely.
And I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
But I can't afford a house in Bentonville either. So I live in an RV full time. And that was my solution, which I love. I
Yeah.
absolutely love living in RV. It's great. I actually have a parishioner who has an RV hookup on her land. She has a big farm, and
Mhm.
so I rent space from her, and it's wonderful. She's a widow and I'm a single person, so we kind of watch out for each other, and that's great. And then I can take my house on vacation.
Sure.
So there's some real pluses.
And you go to general conference and then they'll
Yeah, exactly. But that was a solution that was open to me. It's not a solution that's open to everyone.
Yeah.
So we do have some property on our church land that is undeveloped that we are looking at what we could do with that. One of the
Mhm.
things we have some church needs we need to address.
Okay.
Primarily, we're looking at mixed income housing
Mhm.
so that you have some higher level housing that can help pay for the whole rest of the space.
Mhm.
We are lucky to live in downtown Bentonville, which is thriving and,
Yep.
multi-million-dollar houses all around us. But then also have missing middle income, which is kind of the where I fall into, and where teachers fall into,
Yeah.
police officers fall into, you know, public servants of all kinds fall into that missing middle. And then also looking at some affordable housing for seniors or for single parents or, that sort of thing. So, but it's very, very early in the conversations. I need my church to have a chance to sound off on what they think our priorities should be before we make a move on that.
No, please, please. Well, we're holding your questions for you.
Okay. Through the Urban Land Institute called Faithful Foundations. It's a program where they trained church leaders on how to do land development. Like, what are the questions you need to ask?
Wow.
What connections do you need to make? So we did send a team to be part of that.
Mhm.
And it was a very helpful program because, I was not trained on land development in seminary.
No,
Not a
I don't. I went to seminary too, and I don't
right.
remember that either. But
No,
go.
they skipped right over that. There's so much they skip over in seminary. How to unclog a toilet and how to do land development. It's just not covered. But anyway, so we were part of that program, and one of the things that we learned as part of that is when we started out, they knew that there was 5 square miles in Northwest Arkansas of undeveloped land owned by religious organizations. I think by the time we were finishing up that program, they had discovered that it was closer to 7.5 square miles, and they were discovering more and more and more. So there's a tremendous amount of undeveloped land that's owned by religious entities
Mm.
and really could be a way to help address the needs of our community. So anyway, we're part of that conversation now.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, would then the church, that if this comes to fruition and the affordable housing project goes through,
Mhm.
would the church continue to own that land and then manage it as a landlord? Or how would that work?
There's a lot of different models out there, and
Okay.
that's another thing that we will look at as we're having conversation about what our priorities need to be. My own personal opinion is that we should never let go of ownership of the land because you never get land back. Oh, and but you can have a developer come in where it's basically like a land lease, right?
Okay.
They lease the land and then they do the development on top of it, and we could set some parameters around that. We could do a kind of mixed model where we do the building, but there are nonprofits that manage like building projects like this. So they would
Okay.
take over like the maintenance and finding the people to rent and doing all of the paperwork and that sort of thing. Or we could completely take it on. And then in that case, we would need to hire staff that was specifically managing that whole area. I'll be quite honest, among the conversations that I've had, that's the one that people tend to be least interested in.
Mhm.
But we have yet to kind of see what will unfold as we do this. Like I said, it's very, very preliminary conversations, but right now that means that all of the possibilities are on the table. So, yeah.
Alright.
What kind of housing do you envision, like, realistically, and what kind of housing would you really like if you could get it done?
We have a neighborhood to match, and as I mentioned, we have multi-million-dollar houses all around, but we also have tremendous amount of need. So, the tremendous amount of need would imply something like a big complex, right? A 3 or 4-story complex out there. The neighborhood implies something like you can build townhouses. They're quadplexes that look like very large homes. And we could do like 3 designs on Central Avenue is our main, like, that kind of thing would match our Central Avenue facing side of our church. So you could actually have 4 rental units in what looks like a really large house. So that would match our community as far as, sort of the vibe of that side. The Second Street side is very different. We're across from an elementary school. We're right at the point where retail starts to come in
Yep.
right there, and so Second Street has a completely different vibe to it. And we're boxed in between those 2 streets. And so honestly, I don't know. I know, for me, especially as I'm having these conversations with my congregation, I don't want to get too tied into an idea,
Right.
because I find that people can be very creative, and then I've met all of these architects who are extraordinarily creative, and so I just think that there's a lot of possibilities out there, and I don't want to tie too much into one idea before we've explored what could be. So I kind of want to leave us open on that in that space. So
I remember in Brooklyn, probably about 10 years ago in Brooklyn, New York. This wasn't for housing, but this was more of like a small business thing. They had taken these containers, right, from the
yeah,
container trucks,
yeah,
and converted them. Like they had little shops, they had radio stations, stuff like that. And the point of that is like the ingenuity of people to do with as much as you can with as little as you can to help as many people as possible. It's fun going through those ideas of how you can do that for
yeah.
people like that. That's pretty cool.
One of the churches that was in the program with us is developing. They have a good chunk of land in Fayetteville, to College Town, and so they're looking at developing a lot of different kind of townhouse spaces, but also integrating green space and walking space in there, and
Mhm.
doing some hydroponic gardening alongside as well, so that the community generates food, and their church has a food pantry like ours does. So their hope is to, develop those kinds of skills and teach the community how to do hydroponic gardening, and then have the food available to distribute to the food pantry. Community from the Pacific Islands in Springdale that is looking at, they frequently have, just extended families all living together.
Okay.
And sometimes, because they are an immigrant population, they find it's hard to find housing. And
Right.
so kind of some transitional housing as people come in, and that they can provide a landing place while for multi-generational families, while they figure out where they're going to actually be able to move into. There's one church that was only looking at helping single mothers.
Okay.
Well, actually, it was single mothers and elderly widow women,
Okay.
so that they had a community together. The elderly women could be sort of like grandmother figures
Yeah.
for the mothers with children, right? And the younger families could also help out the older women. So it's just, there's a lot of possibility, and that kind of thing is very exciting and very cool to see all of that happening.
It is the great evangelist Amy Semple McPherson. When she began her career, she was a very famous Pentecostal minister who actually revolutionized getting religious services on radio. But
Yeah.
one of her early ministries was to partner single mothers with older single women or widows. So the young women could go out and get a job and support themselves and get career experiences, while the widow or the older woman would take care of the child, provide childcare. And that was a
Yeah.
partnership that actually worked very well. Unless you've actually been down to Bentonville Square, we call it Bentonville Square because it's the locus of the community. to know just how well placed the church is. I live 2 blocks away. I live right over there myself. I was very fortunate to get an affordable rent in an affordable place, but one of the wonderful things about this area is you're steps away from the grocery store. You're steps away from the bank. You're steps away from the park and green areas, so you can actually move around, and there's trails. There are restaurants, there are shops, there are near Bentonville City Hall and the library. Everything is right there within steps away. So not only sometimes I see these housing developments, they put them way out. They wanna hide these folks away.
Mhm.
And they're not really part of the community. They're marginalized if they don't have public transportation. The public transportation down here is shaky. These folks are really isolated, and this church is right where everything is happening. And for folks who need affordable housing, not having to spend 2 hours a day or paying for Ubers or whatnot would make an enormous difference in their lives.
There's an organization that's actually they were gifted property downtown years and years and years ago that specifically works with women who are fleeing abusive situations or fleeing trafficking, having been trafficked, and they have
Okay.
children. You have to have children to go there, and they get 2 years
Mhm.
of living in these apartments. They're each given a little apartment, and they get 2 years to kinda get their feet underneath them. They could do therapy, they can enroll in school, they for work, they get all kinds of life skills training while they're there, and then at the end of the 2 years, they're ready to go out.
Yeah.
They've lived downtown for 2 years, and there's nowhere for them to go, and so it means uprooting their children, taking them to new schools, potentially like, most of these women don't have cars. Now they have to find a car to get to a job that they've been able to walk to up to this point. So it basically, while it gives them 2 years to breathe, the reality is then that they almost have to reinvent themselves again when they
Right.
leave, as there's no pathway into, like, being able to rent somewhere downtown, so we could even be a sort of funnel for that organization and help them then to build up some more credit and save some and then be able to get out on their own a little bit better. So, it'd be like a next step in their journey
Yeah.
kinda thing. So
It says here that you spent the last 6 months in the training program called Faithful Foundation, designed to
Mm.
help churches develop affordable housing proposals. And it says 5 other churches across Northwest Arkansas participated too, which was organized by Urban Land Institute, Northwest Arkansas. So, what's the next step for your church and for those 5 other churches? What do you guys plan on doing next?
Yes. So for me, I was always honest with the folks at ULI that what this would do was give us the information and the training that we needed to even see if this was a possibility for us. So
Mm.
we always went in with the expression that our timeline was going to move slower than most folks. In addition, we are part of a denomination, and I'm sure most of you are unfamiliar with the fact that with the United Methodist churches, the local church does not actually own our land. It is
Right.
held in trust by the denomination, really. And so anything big, a big building project, has to go through multiple levels of denominational clearance.
Mhm.
This was a small team of us that went through this. We're spending the next year in conversation with the congregation because
Yeah.
if this is not the will of the congregation, there's no sense in pursuing.
Right.
Right.
We don't want to, but we're gonna do it anyway.
But anyway, so we'll spend a year in conversation with folks and really giving people a chance to voice what they're and we need to forward think for the church as well as forward think for our community. So those kind of need to go hand in hand in those conversations. The other churches were further along.
Okay.
They came into this with full intention of they kind of had ideas and plans and were able when they sat down, I mean, it was really wonderful. You got to sit down with architects, you got to sit down with developers, you got to do all that. When they would sit down, they'd be like, "This is the vision that we have," and they came out with plans and all of that. And the last meeting that we had was our pitch, and there were developers there were city officials, all kinds of different investors, nonprofit organizations, things like that. And so all of the rest of the churches made a pitch. And so they have and those were kind of some of the ideas that I talked about. The Marshallese community that's trying to make transitional housing on their property. The community that's trying to build the single women, elderly women community. There is one church that it looks like they had big dreams, but they've run into some big hurdles. So they at least are probably not going to get theirs done for a while. And then there's another church that I think they could move on theirs quickly, because theirs was specifically for like the public servant end, and they're going to build a house at a time, and the people actually get a loan for the house, and they own the house. But the requirement of owning the house is that they have to sell it back to the church
Okay.
at a certain percentage increase, right? I think the increase depends on the number of years they spend in the house, up to a certain point. But that allows them to have a house that they own, and they build their equity and they build all of that. And then they have this guaranteed sale back, right? Because they sell it to the church, who then turns around and sells it to someone else, right? And so the church maintains the ownership. The church owns the land and sort of has kind of the built-in, like, they know they're going to be buying these houses back, but they're building a new house when they sell the house, they build the next house, right? And then sell that house and then can build the next house. So they're sort of inch by inch funding what will probably be 12 to 15 houses on their property that people will own and will be able to move out of and maybe move into another home at some point.
I love the creativity, and I love the fact that, not every community is the same. And then also the cultural differences that you pointed out. I'm from Chicago, where we do have a lot of immigrant families, and some of those immigrant families practice, the genders are separated. And what they will often do, we have a lot of what we call 2 flats or 3 flats, which are basically relatively large apartments, but they're stacked up on top of each other. But you see a lot of Muslim families, for example, who live in these homes where the ladies can have their space, the men will have their space, and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. They can separate things a little bit more, giving everybody privacy, but the family is together and living together and supporting each other. So, that's one consideration. Some people may need ranch style housing. They may have people with disabilities, oftentimes will want something that's all on one level. Every community is different, and so I'm fascinated by everybody's openness, but also that the possibilities that exist for this kind of project. As we wind up, what would you tell faith leaders or people who are involved in faith communities who are thinking, "Hey, we've got this parcel of land." Some of these churches, the enrollment has gone down, or they don't have huge congregations anymore. We have this parking lot that nobody is using, or something like that. What would you tell them to do?
I would encourage them to think a lot of times, especially when you're in trouble, you turn more and more inward. And I think that's exactly what kills us.
Mhm.
They say the church is the only organization that exists for people who aren't part of the organization, right? That's one of the expressions out there. And so I would encourage them to do that. I will share, it's not necessarily related to affordable housing, but our church made a policy change. It wasn't really a change, we just finally started voicing it, that we would not charge nonprofits for the use of our building. We have more than 20 nonprofits now that meet and use our space. And because we are downtown, we also have a parking lot that is used all the time and is always full. And in fact, yesterday I was coming back to the church for a meeting, and I had to park 2 blocks away from my own church because there were so many people in our church building and so many people using downtown. And sometimes people have said, "Shouldn't we charge for our parking? Shouldn't we do that?" And I'm like, "No. This is a gift we have for the community, and we should give this gift to the community. And does it cost us? Yes, it does. But also what it does is show hospitality and
Mhm.
warmth to so many people now.
Yeah.
The number of people that come in our building in this community that feel warmly welcomed and received, and I mean, we have nonprofit leaders that start crying when we tell them they can meet in our building and there's no cost. And just to be able to provide a home like that, I would encourage people who are feeling desperate to start thinking about the home they can be with the property they currently have.
Okay.
And then also tell them that there are a lot of ways to make things happen on your property that don't actually cause you a lot of cost.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's good.
if you would start exploring what those possibilities are, and there's some folks out there that will try to take advantage, but there are legitimately nonprofits that will come in and build on your property, and you can maintain the ownership of the property, and they will build it, run it, and you get the benefit of providing the space to help the community and a built-in neighborhood right next to your church.
Mhm.
Right?
Well, that's
You
one way to
know,
get them to church. That's for sure. It's like, well, you're right
right.
next door. You have no
I
excuse.
mean, you're already parked here, right?
You're already.
We have coffee and donuts. Come on over.
I'm
So I just encourage them to think about that. There are some churches that are doing pretty well. Our church is doing pretty well. And what I'm having to tell my church is there's still a cliff coming. It's once the boomers and the silents pass away,
Mhm.
Gen X down are still as generous as boomers and above are, but we do not exclusively give to one organization anymore.
Right.
And so the church is being supported alongside the American Heart Association, alongside, the local nonprofit that's helping out women, abused women. Everybody's trying to get the same piece of pie there. And so also being creative about what you could do with your property means that you can also come up with other ways of generating income. And if you can generate income that also is a deep service to your community, that doesn't draw your nonprofit status into question. And it helps you actually fulfill your mission. So,
Gosh, yeah.
do that. So,
Do unto others, all that.
so I just encourage churches to start really thinking creatively about what's possible and what it could mean for us to be those kinds of entities in our community.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic too. We need solutions like that too, because there is a lot there, not a lot of places have like a lot of land or anything like that, but the ones that do, I think that's a heck of a good idea, especially if you're able to develop it, control it yourself, give the person the opportunity to buy it. But like you said, if they sit under the rules that, yeah, if you sell it, you're going to sell it back to the church,
Yeah.
right? If that way you're not doing this like what do they call it? Buying it low and selling high, and then treating it like investments instead of the actual homes that are needed for people to live
Right.
in like that. So that's a great alternative, and I wish you much success on that. And come back later when you guys get some
Yeah.
ideas, and part 2, tell us how you're doing it.
I'd
We'd
love
love
to
to
do.
hear.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. And thanks for the opportunity to share this story. I think it's important for people to be thinking about and talking about. So, yeah.
Well, these
Yeah.
19 people that are watching, they're all on parole, so yeah, they're court ordered to
What?
watch the show. So
One of them was raised United Methodist.
there's always one. There's
Everybody's having a
there's there
Our friend Willie Brand.
shining up the apple for the teacher. Yeah, we know what you're doing, Willie. Well, thank you so much.